I'm making the case for Israel, the Jewish people's homeland. All right. Now, I know it's been some time since we were in this series. We had Purim, and then we had the resurrection. And so it's been a couple of weeks. So I want to go backwards a little bit and just rewind just enough for us to be able to move forward in time. All right. You'll remember we began this series months ago dealing with the biblical record, which took us up to basically 135. We traced the covenants, the Abrahamic covenant. We saw how Moses and the activities of Exodus interact with the Abrahamic covenant and are dependent on the Abrahamic covenant. We saw how the Mosaic covenant was received by Israel. So Israel by this point had received not only the Abrahamic covenant, but now also the Mosaic covenant, one an unconditional covenant, one a conditional covenant. We saw the land that was promised to the Jewish people. That's in the cross hatch. We see the land they actually take, which is in the green. Speaking of land, we saw the land covenant at the end of Deuteronomy. We saw how Joshua interacts with the Abrahamic covenant and what the story of Joshua and the conquest is dependent upon the Abrahamic covenant. We later saw the Davidic covenant, the Jewish king, the future messianic hope and promise, the son of David, who would be the capstone, the cherry on top of the other covenants and guaranteeing the other covenants with a future messianic leader. We saw how Solomon interacted and understood the Davidic covenant as he builds the temple and understands the Davidic dynasty promise. We saw the land of Israel expand under Solomon. Look at the crosshatch. That's what Solomon did. Now, ladies and gentlemen, that is what making 700 alliances, political alliances, having 700 wives will do for you. Okay, but as you can imagine, 700 wives, the maintenance of 700 wives and the maintenance of the land surrounding those 700 alliances cannot be maintained for very long. And indeed, the kingdom divides in 931 BC into a northern kingdom, a southern kingdom, kingdom of Israel, the kingdom of Judah. We looked at the prophets. And within the prophets, we explored the new covenant. The new covenant is so very, very important to everything we understand. That is it is the synthesis of the Davidic covenant, the land covenant, and the Abrahamic covenant, all put together into an amazing package. That is the covenant under which we operate. Our relationship with God is based on that contract. We saw the destruction and deportation of that northern kingdom in 722, so they were only around for 200 years, and then they were gone. And then the exile and return, which begins in 605, extends for quite some time. The return to Babylon, the exile to Babylon, the return from Babylon, the southern kingdom. Then we saw the Greek occupation. That's not the Greek job. That means the occupation of the land. 333 BC, Alexander the Great. That lasts until the end of the Jewish revolt against the Syrian Greeks, 167 and 164. That's what we celebrate at Hanukkah. That results in a 100-year-long kingdom, the Hasmonean and the Maccabees, who win that ragtag group of revolutionaries, win that guerrilla warfare, they win that battle, and they install themselves as priest kings in the Hasmonean kingdom, free and independent Jewish kingdom that lasts from 164 to 63 BC. This is the territory. By the end of the Hasmonean kingdom, they take all this territory, just like Solomon. That could not be easily maintained. Nobody married 700 wives, but they did need, just like Solomon needed, they needed political alliances, and one of the political alliances that toward the end of the Hasmonean dynasty that they got entangled in this free and independent Jewish kingdom are the Romans. And the Romans in 63 take advantage of this in 63 BC, and they occupy Israel all the way through this period, 63 to 135. The Romans don't leave in 135, but that marks the end of this particular section. We are in this period of time of the Roman Revolution, the Roman occupation rather. We have the New Testament. We see Jesus, we see Yeshua interacting specifically with the new covenant as he establishes a new era in human history. At communion, this is my body, this is my blood. The new covenant ratified in my blood, poured out for you. Well, the New Testament era ends, and we are in a transitional period of time, so 30 years, roughly 3 decades after the death, burial, and resurrection of our Messiah. We have the first Roman Revolution, so the Romans have been there since 63 BC, so you add 63 years on this end and 66 years on this end, you get 120 some odd years, and at this time the Jewish people have had enough, the Romans said to the Jewish people, we find you revolting, and indeed they were. They revolted, but they lose. And that is a disaster. In 73, it finally is over. But in 70, in the midst of the war, the temple is destroyed, and the Jewish people are deported into various regions of the Roman Empire. This is the Arch of Titus, should be familiar to most of us. What we see with the Arch of Titus is, of course, the famous menorah being carted off into captivity. It's very sad. It's very sad. Very sad indeed. Well, Masada, of course, is the end, marks the end of the war, the suicide of the last of the Jewish zealots. And there's peace for a while, but the grandchildren of the original revolutionaries stage another revolution. It's called the Second Roman Revolution, and it is marked around an individual named Shimon ben Kosova, and he is renamed by Rabbi Akiva. I've told you the story. Shimon bar Kochba, the son of the star, recognized by this great Rabbi Akiva and by a large portion, a huge portion of the Jewish populace and most of the revolutionaries as the Messiah who was going to liberate the Jewish people once for all, throw off the shackles of Roman occupation, the Messiah, son of the star, and they lose. I showed you this. This is a letter dating from the Bar Kokhba army. I showed you the coin that was discovered, that video a couple weeks ago. That's back in February. They discovered some coins from that era. And this was actually just discovered a couple weeks ago. This is, you know how today Gaza is riddled with a systematic series of tunnels that are built, of course, very elaborately with concrete and miles down and electricity. But the concept of tunnels in this area actually dates back millennia. And this outside in the Galilee region, this series of tunnels was found that date back from the Second Roman Revolution. Again, this just was discovered a couple of weeks ago. And reported on. This is a picture of the tunnel that runs underneath the Galilee where the revolutionaries would move and move quickly. Obviously not as fancy schmancy as what is built today in Gaza, but the precursor certainly to this kind of warfare in this area. Of course, the war doesn't end well. Second revolution, again, ends in defeat, and Jerusalem is renamed as Aelia Capitolina. Judea itself is renamed, the entire region, Galilee, Judea, is renamed Syria, Palestina, after the ancient enemies of the Jewish people, the Philistines. And so Syria, Palestina simply becomes another province in the Roman Empire. We move beyond that period of time to 136 to today, to the present, the historical record. That's what we began last week, or the week before, or last time, or the week before that. And we explored the Byzantine era. What is the Byzantine era? Not when people are particularly busy. The Byzantine, the name comes from the name of the city Byzantium. And the Roman Empire by that time had grown so vast, so broad, that it actually required two different emperors to administer that vast territory. So you had a Western Roman Empire emperor, and you had an Eastern emperor who was ruling from Byzantium, Constantinople at that time, 300 to 600 AD. So eventually the Roman Empire, the Western Roman Empire, kind of collapses upon itself. If you know your history, the Visigoths and the Ostrogoths and all the other Goths came knocking at the door, and basically the barbarians were at the gates, right? And a great level of illegal immigrants came into Rome, and at first it was somewhat convenient because there were jobs that perhaps the Romans wouldn't do, that these new migrants were put to work doing, and oftentimes they were employed by the military, and it seemed to be an answer to prayer. But before you knew it, because there were so many migrants that came in, that the Roman culture was overwhelmed by their neighbors, and Rome collapsed by the beginning of the 5th century. So the Byzantine era continued. The Eastern Empire continued. And under the Eastern Empire, you have this region, various different provinces. You have Syria in the north, and you have Arabia, you have Palestina, or another way of slicing the region up was Palestina 2, Palestina 3, Palestina 1, etc. Then, of course, the Muslim conquest follows the Byzantine era. The Byzantines are defeated by the Muslim hordes as they come across and sweep across from Arabia, the area of Syria, Palestina, not far from Arabia, right? So 636, there's a conquest, and that conquest continues until the period of the Crusades in 1096. During this period of time, not long after coming and taking control of this region, the Dome of the Rock is built. Then, as we mentioned, the Crusades occurred, 1096. The European Christendom, European Christians, are charged by the Pope to liberate the Holy Land from the Islamic infidels, right? It's not right, it's not meet, it's not appropriate for the Islamic infidels to be in control of the Holy Land. And so the Crusaders are charged, and they come from Europe, from Germany and from England and from France and Austria, various other places, and in Europe, Germany, and they come and they have a wave of successive crusades. Some are successful. Well, they're all successful until they're driven back. So you have this basic 200-year period of the Crusades. And one of the interesting things about the Crusades is that it provided an opportunity for the Christian soldiers, the onward Christian soldiers. It provided an opportunity while the soldiers, the armies, rampaged and marched through the countries of Europe. Along the way, as they passed various different Jewish communities and villages and towns they practiced for their invasion of the Holy Land. And how they practiced was to besiege the Jewish community, to threaten them with death if they did not convert, if they did not receive baptism. If they did not receive baptism, and the vast majority of the Jewish communities did not respond positively to that, and so they would do things like lock the whole community in the synagogue and set the synagogue on fire. Convert or die. So you had, coming from the east, you had the Islamic horde, which conquered by sword, convert or die. And you have the Christians coming from the west down to the Holy Land and doing the same thing. Convert or die. A lot of Jewish people were killed along the way. By the time this is roughly what the Crusade kingdom looked like at the time of the period of the Crusades. You can see the Jewish people are, they're not doing actually as well. I mentioned this last time. They're not doing as well under the Crusaders as they were under Islamic rule. Remember, with Islamic occupation, as a general rule, and depending on the whims and the cruelty of the rulers of these provinces, but as a general rule, as a Jewish person under the occupation of Islam, as long as the Jewish people were content to accept their second-class status as non-citizens, dhimmi, D-H-I-M, not dummy status, dhimmi, D-H-I-M-M-I, dhimmi status, second-class inferior status, if they would accept that certain rights they couldn't have because they were second class, as long as they paid the jizra, the Islamic tax for those who were non-Islamic, as long as you paid tribute and recognized the superiority of Islam to your faith tradition, the Jewish people pretty much were able to live in peace. Under the Crusaders, it was somewhat more challenging because Christendom by that time, to the shame of Christendom, by that time they had long adapted the theology that the church had replaced Israel as true Israel. So the fact that you still had Israel, the Jewish people, were still in existence, was an abject affront to Christendom, because how could Christendom be true Israel when these pesky Jewish people still continue to exist? It seems to put the lie to the Jewish people being replaced by the church, and indeed it does. But nonetheless, they also have the concept that was developed of deicide, the accusation of deicide. The Jewish people are, as a whole, for all time and in all places, the Jewish people, as a people, are responsible for the death of God, having killed Jesus. Right? And so, persecuting the Jewish people, whether in Europe or in the Holy Land, was, in a sense, a religious obligation and was a way of helping God out. Since the Jewish people needed to disappear in order to demonstrate that the church was the true spiritual Israel, it would help God out to remove physical Israel off the face of the earth. So, when we talk about how difficult it is for Jewish people to accept Yeshua as their Messiah, for Jewish people to entertain the gospel's challenge, it's a very difficult issue. It's a very sensitive issue. And that's because because the Jewish people are continually being faced with this antagonistic concept of the church trying to share the gospel with Jewish people. Jewish people understanding the persecution that the church has imposed upon the Jewish people, it is easy to understand why the Jewish people might be reluctant, resistant to accept Jesus. And see, the thing about sharing the gospel with Jewish people is that most Jewish people, they're not rejecting the gospel. They haven't heard the gospel. They're not rejecting Jesus. They haven't been introduced to Jesus. They haven't been introduced to Yeshua. What most Jewish people react to is the activity of the church. The actions taken in the name of Christ by the church representing Jesus. And so it's no surprise that Jewish people, understanding our very painful history, and this is just one chapter of a very long and painful history. Holocaust is still 3.5 or 4 centuries separate. But a long and a painful history makes it very difficult to be receptive to the gospel. So, bottom line is, don't be surprised when Jewish people object. They need to be introduced to their Messiah one step at a time. They need to understand what the gospel is. They need to understand who Yeshua, who Jesus is. And they especially need to know what Yeshua, what Jesus taught his disciples to do. And to the extent that Christendom, as a historical whole, has acted in contradistinction to the call of Yeshua to love one another and to understand that the Jewish people are God's chosen people and there are covenants and promises that God made that he will not break. Once the Jewish people see there's a disparity, a very clear disparity between the behavior of the church as it is acted historically and the teaching of Jesus. So again, don't be surprised when a Jewish person it's a challenge for a Jewish person to come to faith. There is a lot of cultural, historical, and sociological junk, hurdles to overcome. That makes sense? All right. Well, the Ottoman Empire takes control of this area. The Crusades are over. 1516, 1517, the Ottomans come in. Who are the Ottomans? People who like to sit on couches and hassocks, right? The Ottomans. No, the Ottomans are the Turks. It's the Turkish Empire. And they rule 16, 17, 18, 19, about 4 centuries. Extraordinary. And you can see the Ottoman Empire in brown there. Later on, it's broader than that. You can see the various different levels of brown. That's the Ottoman Empire. And you see, even though it's a broad picture, you can see that the region that we would call Palestine or Judea, it's simply a province of Jerusalem. This is a backwater area. The headquarters, the capital of the Ottoman Empire is up in Istanbul, up by the Black Sea, where the Black Sea is meeting the Mediterranean Sea. Right there in that center point is that isthmus is Istanbul. And so by the time you get all the way down into the province of Jerusalem, it's just a backwater area of the Ottoman Empire that is really not paid too much attention to. Once Suleiman the Magnificent, the great Sultan of the Ottoman Empire, built the walls that surround Jerusalem today, built them on the foundations of the Roman walls around the city of Jerusalem. But Suleiman the Magnificent had a builder and an architect build these magnificent walls. These are the walls that encircle Jerusalem even today, that you see them today. And we marvel and we say how extraordinary they are. You can see in the picture the Roman level, which is further down. You see the little gate, the open gate down on the side there. There's another one on the other side. Those were the original Roman level. And then, of course, over time, as the Ottomans built and rebuilt these walls, we have this center gate right there. In 1850, while the Ottoman Empire is controlling the land of Palestine, we have what's known as the rise of Zionism. And that begins roughly in 1850, and we're going to trace that through the independence of the Israeli state in 1948, May of 1948. Last time I read a portion for you from Mark Twain's travelogue, and this is actually a really important quote from Twain. Why? Why is it, first of all, what's Twain doing? Mark Twain, you're familiar with the name, after the Civil War, in 1866, 1867, he takes a world tour. He crosses over, and as he's touring Europe, and then he'll depart for parts south, he goes from Europe all the way through Asia Minor into the Holy Land, and then from there into Egypt. And then from Egypt back home. And he writes a travelogue of this, I don't know, year long? I don't remember exactly how long it takes. But nonetheless, it's a lengthy period of time. And this travelogue records his adventures with anecdotes and observations along the way. Really wonderful. The piece of work is called The Innocents Abroad. And its value lies in his recollection of what the land of Israel was like. If we were to listen to voices on television today and protesters today on television, you would hear the story that the Palestinian people have been in the land of Israel for hundreds or 1,000, 2,000 even years in large numbers. And when the Zionists came in the 19th century, they began to displace and antagonize the large number of native Arabs living in the land, whom they would refer to themselves as Palestinians. Right? That is a redefinition of history. Mark Twain tells it like it is. He was there and recorded it. And we'll stop with the reading of Mark Twain, and we'll continue from there. I have some videos I want to show you next week. I have like 3, maybe even 4 videos that I want to show you, because as we get closer, as we get into the 19th and 20th century, I want us to see, with video and with more maps, I would like us to see and zero in on what's actually happening in that land. Okay, so what Mark Twain writes is this. Innocents Abroad, page 606 to selections from 606 to 608. Of all the lands that there are for dismal scenery, I think Palestine must be the prince. Hills are barren, dull of color, unpicturesque in shape. Valleys are unsightly deserts, fringed with a feeble vegetation that has an expression about it of being sorrowful and despondent. The Dead Sea, the Sea of Galilee, sleep in the midst of a vast stretch of hill and plain, wherein the eye rests upon no pleasant tint, no striking object, no soft picture, dreaming in a purple haze or mottled with the shadows of the clouds. Every outline is harsh, every feature is distinct. There is no perspective, distance works no enchantments here. It is hopeless, dreary, heartbroken land. In fact, Palestine sits in sackcloth and ashes. Over it broods the spell of a curse that has withered its fields and fettered its energies. One of the things we can see as he describes this in poetic and picturesque, albeit negative terms, is how non-agriculturally fertile, how infertile, shall we say, the land is. He hasn't mentioned a single person yet, or a single village. He'll mention a village or two. But the land is not teeming with native residents. There's no agriculture to be mentioned here so far. Where Sodom and Gomorrah reared its domes and towers, the solemn sea that's the Dead Sea, now floods the plain in whose bitter waters no living thing exists, hence why it's called the Dead Sea. So everything is motionless and dead. His borders grow nothing but weeds, gathering tufts of cane. Nothing there. So that's the area of the Dead Sea. Nobody's there, nothing's there. Let's move on. How about Nazareth? Well, Nazareth, he says, is forlorn. What does that mean? Forlorn, it means there's nobody in Nazareth. Nazareth is not a thriving village. If anybody's there, it's just a small pocket of people. How about the ford of the Jordan where the hordes of Israel entered the promised land? That would be right where Jericho is. Here we find people, he says. One finds only a squalid camp of fantastic Bedouins in the desert. That's not a village. Those are people who are nomadic and they live in tents. So they're there now and living outside of Jericho. Jericho itself lies in a moldering ruin, he says. How about Bethlehem? That's important. Bethlehem and Bethany, two important cities in the Bible. In their poverty and their humiliation, have nothing about them now to remind one that they once knew the high honor of the Savior's presence. The hallowed spot where the shepherds watched their flocks by night, where the angels sang peace on earth, goodwill to men, the shepherds' fields, that's Bethlehem, is untenanted by any living creature and unblessed by any feature that is pleasant to the eye. Who's living in Bethlehem? Very few people, and nobody's tending the fields full of sheep in Bethlehem. They're not there. Renowned Jerusalem itself, there are people in Jerusalem. Renowned Jerusalem itself, the stateliest name in history, has lost all its ancient grandeur and has become a pauper village. The wonderful temple, which was the pride and glory of Israel, is gone. The Ottoman crescent is lifted above the spot where they once reared the Holy Cross. Now, Jerusalem has a population, the majority of the population of Jerusalem at that time is actually Jewish. It's like 24,000 Jewish people. Jewish people are not living throughout the land. They're living in certain communities throughout the land. One of the major communities is Jerusalem, and there's 24,000. And there are a minority Arab population living in Jerusalem as well at that time. How about the noted Sea of Galilee? Long ago deserted by the devotees of war and commerce, and its borders are a silent wilderness. Now, if you go to the Sea of Galilee today, of course, you're going to be surrounded by hotels and communities, whatever. Nothing. Nothing, no one, when he was there. There was a small Jewish community, lived on the shore of the Sea of Galilee in the city of Tiberias. It's one of the 4 holy cities of the Jewish people, Jerusalem being one, Hebron in the south being another. In the north, there's a city called Tzfat that was the charismatic and mystical center, and then Tiberias. This is the region where the Mishnah originally was compiled, but of course that was centuries earlier. That was 16th centuries earlier by the time Twain was there. In Galilee, he goes on, he says, Capernaum, shapeless ruin, Magdala, the home of beggared Arabs. Okay, so there is a small village in Magdala, he says. Bethsaida, Chorazin have vanished from the earth. You can't find them, that's true. The desert places round them where thousands of men once listened to the Savior's voice and ate the miraculous bread, sleep in the hush of a solitude, inhabited not by hordes of residents, but inhabited only by birds of prey and skulking foxes. It's really, I think that's really interesting. Mark Twain is not the only one who has recorded contemporaneous observations of the land. Next time we're together, I will summarize I've just found it, actually, it was just sent to me from like 1692. There's a Latin book that was recorded, and what the guy did at the time was he went throughout the land, and we'll talk about it next time. He went throughout the land and recorded all the place names, all the villages that he could find, all the place names, wanting to see if these names go back to Bible times, or if they're Arabic names. What are they? And spoiler alert, I'll just tell you the findings. We'll discuss it more next time. What he found is that he found not one village, not one locale that had an indigenous Arabic name. It might have been an Arabic adaptation, but all of the names were either based in Hebrew, go back to biblical times, were Greek, or were Roman. Now you can have, like Caesarea Philippi is sometime later on is renamed as Panias. It's Caesarea Philippi where Jesus says, "Who am I? Who do men say that I am? You are the Christ, Son of the living God." Panias, I'll show you next time. It's a place where the god Pan was worshipped by the pagans. And so it's renamed in Arabic Banyas, because in Arabic there's no p sound. So this is the only people in the world, indigenous people, who actually can't pronounce their own name. There's no p that the Arabs can't pronounce it. So they call themselves Philistina, right? And Panyas becomes a soft P, Banyas. But point being that all the names go back to biblical and/or Greek and/or Roman times. There's nothing to be found that's actually indigenous Arabic. We'll pick it up later, right where we left off, next time. Let's stand for the Aaronic benediction.